Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Saim Safdar, and you are listening to the Cognitive.fm podcast. I'm excited and thrilled to host this show for you. This is episode number 7 of Cognitive.fm podcast. Today is April the 1st, 2021, and in this episode, we dive into what you need to know for Rancher Kubernetes Engine and K3S with my guest, Adrian Goins. Let me introduce my guest. Adrian Goins has been building internet infrastructure since 1996, but he is one of those super nerds who started writing basic program on a C64 13 years before that. He joined Rancher Labs in 2017 and since then has worked as a field engineer and a tech marketer. Before becoming the director of community and evangelism, he is thrilled to share his love of technology with everyone and wants nothing more than to see Kubernetes take over the world. You can subscribe to Adrian Goins' YouTube channel where he shares how you can make complex things that look so simple and so awesome. Informative tutorials and discussion around Kubernetes, Rancher, cloud native computing, automation, DevOps, and a lot more. And his mission is to help people use technology to live a better life. He spent 20 years building internet infrastructure for massive media companies. Now he lives in Chile and works in the cloud. Want to see what he is up to? Follow him on Twitter, Adrian.Goins. And let's go ahead, say hi to Adrian Goins, aka Monarchus, and cut it over to the interview. Thank you everyone for joining our session today. And today is we're talking about what you need to know for Ranchers RKE and K3S with my guest Adrian. I think you know about him if you're watching this YouTube channel at Adrian Goins TV. But I'm really happy that he showed up. And tonight, how are you, Adrian?
I'm great. I'm great. Thank you for having me here. It's great to be here.
And if you Adrian is a technical evangelist at Suse, and he is the best person for me to ask these questions around what Rancher is, how Rancher K3S, what RKE is, what Kubernetes is, what distros are. So can you introduce yourself a bit to our audience if someone doesn't know about you? I don't know. I see many of the people already knows you. But if some of them don't know you, how you find yourself on the internet, what you currently do, where you live right now, and how you got introduced to container and Kubernetes and cloud native ecosystem.
Sure. I figure most people probably don't know me. So my name is Adrian Goins. I'm currently the technical evangelist at Suse. I've had so many titles over the last few months with the transition and stuff. I hardly remember who I am. So I've just always been connected to technology. For as far back as I can remember, I was tearing apart radios and using computers, and my dad worked for Hewlett Packard, so I had access to cool test and measurement equipment, and science and technology just always interested me. And so throughout my career, going back, well, really my entire professional career, I've just always worked with networking, operating systems, moved into data center management. I had a managed services provider for 14 years that built and managed data centers in the US and Europe for big media companies. And then I moved to Chile. I moved all over the place. I moved to Europe and then I moved back to the United States. And then I moved to Chile in 2013. And that's where I currently am for not that much longer. And then I'll be going back to the United States. And while I was down here, I discovered Docker. And then went from Docker into the limitations of what you could do with that, and then came into Rancher, and then Rancher hired me, and then I was a field engineer. And all the thread I think that runs through all of this is that I understand technology well enough that I'm able to explain it to people in a way that they understand, and to motivate people to just get out there and just try things, because none of us have any idea what we're doing, but somehow we all still move forward.
Yeah, and can you thoughts on how you started your YouTube channel? That I think is being a very wonderful, popular one. I used to watch that and learn so many cool stuff from your YouTube channel as well. Can you introduce your audience what your channel are and what are the technologies you are targeting and how you help the community to learn new things, explore new things, and troubleshoot Kubernetes cluster or ranchers based cluster, and I think any other cluster that Kubernetes have.
Sure. So I have a YouTube channel. You can get to it from adrian.goins.tv, or you can also get to it from cncn.io. So there are two things that are up there right now. There are tutorial explainer type videos around Rancher and Kubernetes, and then the sort of satellite ecosystem that surrounds those things, other technologies that you might want to use. And then there's the Coffee and Cloud Native live stream, which is currently on pause, but will be back. I need to get back to the United States before I can start that again because everything's just really busy right now. But in all of that, it's either explaining how to do things or exposing people to new technology and where it might fit in their lives. And again, looking for the common thread that runs through all of those things, I have to admit to you that the reason I make those things is because I personally need to stay challenged. And I want to have a reason to use that technology myself. So I'm not in places where I have enough infrastructure or enough reason to try all of the cool stuff. It's like going into an ice cream shop and there's 1,000 flavors of ice cream and I want to eat them all, but I can't. So the best I can do is like sample each one and then share them with people, which satisfies my need to constantly be learning, my desire to help train people to use technology to live a better life, and also just because it's fun. Without having an audience or a group of people that I can share that with, it's not nearly as much fun for me to just learn how to do it myself. Throughout my career, when teaching people how to do things, I recognize that in order to teach somebody something, you have to understand it. So it changes how I learn if I know that I'm going to have to explain it to somebody else. And that's the advantage that a platform like YouTube has given me.
Yes, definitely. I think keep up the good work because I'm learning, exploring from you, and every YouTube videos that I watch help me in some way, and hopefully I think it help other people along the way as well. And keep up the good work. I
Cool.
love your stuff. And
Thanks.
so for the first question for our discussion on tonight, what you need to know for a Rancher RKE and K3S. So can you elaborate this in a few words that what it is Kubernetes, why people call it the OS of the cloud, or I heard about people saying that it's a platform for building platforms, and how Rancher came up, and most importantly, how Rancher fits into the Kubernetes ecosystem.
It's like 8 questions in one, but I'll do my best. All right. What is Kubernetes? Somebody, gosh, who was it? I don't remember. It was in a marketing book that I read. There was the whoever, again, I don't remember who it was, but he said that we never really get rid of problems. Like we will never have a problem-free life. The best we can hope for is to trade our problems for a better set of problems, for a set of problems that we're happier to have than the problems we might have today. And I think that Kubernetes is the perfect representation of that. You can look at what we had before Kubernetes, and I grew up building data centers. So, racking and stacking servers and networking equipment and routers and firewalls and BGP peering and all of this stuff. And it was great, but then you had a problem. Like your hardware would, it only had a 3-year amortization schedule, and you had to always be upgrading it, and it was really expensive. And then you had a problem with application density, so you didn't have enough apps on a particular machine to justify the resources for that machine, but you needed to have resources available so that if the app did need it, it was there. So this was just this whole series of problems that resulted in waste. Containers came around and solved a lot of that from the application perspective. Now you have all of the dependencies of an application bundled within a container. You can ship that container and it's guaranteed to run the same everywhere. That's a beautiful thing. But that just created another set of problems of now we've got these containers. How do we wire them together? How do we put them on hosts? How do we share them? And Kubernetes came in to solve that problem. And in doing so, created like 60 other problems that we're all trying to figure out how to solve. I haven't heard that Kubernetes is the OS of the cloud, but that's a good way to describe it. It's not really an operating system, it's an orchestration engine. It's the glue that you need, but it frees you from having to figure all that stuff out. And now, the same way that containers guaranteed that the application would run the same way no matter where you put the container, Kubernetes guarantees that if you build wire your application together and move it to a different Kubernetes cluster, it's going to run the same way. So now your problem is just how do you expose your Kubernetes cluster to the internet, and that basically becomes a DNS issue. That's a lot easier to solve. Rancher's story is great. We all look at what we have today and we think that this is the way that it's always been. So of course, there's always been Kubernetes because it was here when I woke up this morning. So it must have been here yesterday, and beyond that, who cares? Rancher, back in 2014, Kubernetes was like barely a twinkle in anybody's eye. But there was Docker Swarm, and Docker Swarm was well established. There was also Mesos. And Mesos is very, very niche in what they were able to do. They've since pivoted, and now they're all about Kubernetes as well. Swarm, everybody thought Swarm was going to win, but Swarm had limitations on what it could do. And the founders of Rancher said, look, we want something that can take Swarm and really make it more enterprisey, more like a data center where you have a tier of networking and load balancers, and you can wire all these things together, and you've got failover and high availability, all these terms that we understood from building real infrastructure. And they built an orchestration engine called Cattle that did all of those things. Cattle was hugely successful. It was like Swarm, but better or something. Swarm, but with a jet engine. I don't know. But then what happened is Kubernetes took off. And around 2017 or so, Rancher looked and realized that Cattle, while successful, was never going to be as successful as Kubernetes because it just didn't have the community behind it. It had a loyal and devoted community, a lot of whom were really upset when Rancher pivoted to Kubernetes, but it was the right thing to do. So Rancher pivoted to Kubernetes, deprecated Cattle, and what that enabled Rancher to do is build value on top of Kubernetes. Look at the problems that Kubernetes created, and let's solve those problems. Let's make it easier for people to do stuff with Kubernetes. Let's solve the Kubernetes learning curve and get people up and running and using it independent from having to learn it so that they can learn it in parallel. And then as they learn more about it, do more and more things hands-on, and here we are today.
And on the topic of Kubernetes and this orchestration layer, we see the explosion of distros. So can you explain what it is Kubernetes distros and what it is for? And I believe Rancher has two of these. One is called Rancher RKE and might be three, but I see Rancher RKE and K3S. What is other one? If I missed that.
The other one is currently called either RKE Government or RKE 2.
Okay, I missed that. So now I can elaborate all these three of these.
Kubernetes distributions are funny. So Kubernetes is governed, it's not owned necessarily, but it's overseen. Its existence is overseen by the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and the Kubernetes project creates the core of Kubernetes. But they don't really give you anything for deploying it. So a distribution is simply a means of deploying Kubernetes in an environment and then providing access for like upgrades and various other things that you need for the care and feeding of a Kubernetes cluster. Lots of different companies have come up with distributions, which are basically just the way to do that. The most common one that people encounter is kubeadm. kubeadm is a series of scripts that will spin up Kubernetes. But if you deploy something directly on hosts with kubeadm, there's still a bunch of other stuff you have to do. You have to install the kubelet and the proxy and configure all the networking and do these things before you can even bring up a Kubernetes cluster. Rancher is all about shortening the distance between I want to do something and I'm able to do something. And their distributions, the first one that they came up with was RKE, Rancher Kubernetes Engine. RKE takes upstream Kubernetes and packages it into Docker containers. So now the only thing you need on the host is a supported version of Docker. That's really easy to do. You just bring up a host, patch it, install Docker, and then install RKE. And RKE installs over SSH. So from your local machine, if you have SSH access to a bunch of hosts, you create a config file, you run the command RKE up, boom, it goes out, builds a cluster, wires it together, and gives you back a kube config file. Because it's built from a config file, it's declarative in the same way that Kubernetes is. You change that config file and you run RKE up, and you're going to always get the same response. This enables it to do really cool stuff, like go from a single node cluster with just a single etcd to a 3-node cluster with a highly available etcd, and then go back down to a 1 node, and it like decouples and decommissions, and it's RKE is a beautiful thing. And then there's K3S. K3S came about kind of by accident. You can go to, I mean, Darren has podcasts, Darren Shepard has podcasts where he talks about the origin of K3S. Dan Pop has one that you can listen to. And Darren often creates things, and then out of the things that he's creating, he'll create something else. So he was building something and he got tired of how long it took to install Kubernetes because it just installed all this stuff that he didn't need. So he ripped all that stuff out, and then Kubernetes installed faster for his development. And he shared this with a few people, and they were like, wow, that's amazing. Can we have it? And then that grew up and turned into K3S, which is just still CNCF certified Kubernetes. In fact, it now also was donated to the CNCF. But it is so small that it runs beautifully in edge environments, Raspberry Pis, anything that's resource constrained.
Yeah, also I think from the Kubernetes side, when you see things, because Kubernetes is kind of a distributed system, but K3S is kind of a monolith, but it's a very fast. So in the K3S world, like Kubernetes gives you so many options of using container, some network storage or network storage. But K3S, Darren said in their podcast that now we ask people that this is the things like they have inserted networking as a flannel, and they use Ingress for the traffic and these kind of stuff, but it came up to be a really fast one, and at the end of the day you can use any environment, any environment. And what's the name behind K3S?
Yes.
Because I heard what's the name behind K3S?
All right, so because we're all a bunch of nerds, Kubernetes is abbreviated into K8S because it's K, 8 characters, and then S, so it's just an easy way to do it. Well, if you take the word Kates, K8S, that's K-A-T-E-S, well, that could become K3S because 3 is less than 8, and K3S is lighter than Kates or something, but it's still Kubernetes. I see people who are confused thinking that K3S is somehow less than, and it's not. It's just, it's the true core of Kubernetes with all of the default cloud provider stuff taken out and a bunch of alpha stuff taken out and just a bunch of things that you don't need. But you can put all of that stuff back in if you need it. And I think that K3S has opened up access to Kubernetes to people who otherwise wouldn't have had access to it. The same way that the Raspberry Pi brought SBC development, single board computer development, into the hands of everybody because it costs $40. Well, now you can put Kubernetes on a Raspberry Pi and you don't need to spend hundreds of dollars a month or more on cloud infrastructure. You just, if you can get your hands on a Raspberry Pi or an old laptop or a Vagrant virtual machine on your laptop that has 4 gigs of RAM, like you can have a Kubernetes cluster.
I believe what I listen to other people is that K3S is the most used distros of Kubernetes. And why do you think it is so? And why it happens so quickly, people adopting K3S? And what is the best scenarios to go for the K3S solution? And why, and in which cases, or what are the best use cases, or when you use K3S, what are the best production strategies for using the K3S?
Ooh,
a lot to unpack for you.
Yeah. Ultimately, we're getting into a little bit of philosophy here. Adrian's take on humanity. Ultimately, the things that people care about the most outside of like family and stuff like that and religion. But the things that we invest our discretionary time and discretionary money in are the things that we hope will benefit us in some way. Kubernetes and the entire world around cloud native technology is the key to making money. Like if you can develop these skills, you can work from anywhere, and there's so much demand for people to be able to do these things that like it's a no-brainer. If you have any kind of technical interest whatsoever, go learn how to do stuff with Kubernetes and you'll probably be able to make a bunch of money. But take it back to what I said a moment ago, that before something like K3S, you needed to invest money in infrastructure. And so now you're taking the money that you've earned from your current job or the money that you have saved, and you have to decide, is this an investment in Amazon's infrastructure that I'm going to be able to get a return on in enough time to justify it? And I think in the case of cloud native infrastructure, no, it's not. Amazon's expensive. All of them are expensive. So K3S, I use the term, it democratized it. It made it accessible for everyone. Now the resource barrier is much, much lower. And it almost transfers it over to your own willpower. Like now, if you want to do it, the barriers that you have to overcome to start doing it are much smaller. And with enough effort, anybody can overcome them. Now we're in a place where everybody can use it. And I think that's what attributes, or that's what carries over into the popularity of it. So I'm trying to figure out the right way to say that. So it's popular because people can use it. It's not the other way around. And then it also empowers people. So it's almost like a positive feedback loop where the more people use it, the better experience they have, and that leads to more people wanting to use it. The second half of your question was about environments in which to deploy K3S. We've already hit on like single board computers, resource constrained environments. We say that it's best suited for resource constrained environments like IoT and the edge. But the truth of the matter is you can run it anywhere. You can run it in a data center if you want. It's just if you're in a data center, like if you're in AWS, well, K3S doesn't have the storage providers to talk to Amazon's API or Azure or GKE. You have to put those back in, which is a little bit of extra work, but it's not terrible. But if you're in a data center environment, you have enough machine horsepower that you can just deploy RKE instead, and you get all that stuff for free. So do you want to do more work or less work? If you're in a data center, deploy RKE because it's ultimately going to be less work for you. And that's like, we just want to get you to Kubernetes as fast as we can. Everywhere else, I run K3S here in my house. I have a 5-node Proxmox cluster, and I just spin up 3 VMs. They've got 2 cores, 4 gigs of RAM, and now that K3S has the embedded etcd in it, that's an HA Kubernetes cluster. Easy. And that's on like almost a negligible amount of hardware. If you can get a modern laptop, you can run a K3S cluster on your local laptop. Now you open up the door for using K3S for development, and then you get into like K3D where you can actually run it all inside of Docker. And it opens up so many doors that it's like, why wouldn't you want to use it? It makes the whole universe possible.
Yes, definitely. And I think I've seen people use that in a lot of different environment, and also community has built so many awesome tools. Like Alex has put up a K3S catch up with what you call it to build out
catch up. Yep.
So there's a community is very awesome in the ranchers and K3S community as well. So Kubernetes is everywhere, as we know, as in the cloud as well. And there are zillions other ways to build and deploy Kubernetes-based architecture. So what Rancher has to offer in the cloud setups?
Okay, so there's Rancher, the company, and then there's Rancher, the product. And Rancher, the company, was bought by Suse, so it's technically there's no more Rancher, the company. But it's still easy to talk about, Rancher RKE or Rancher K3S or whatever. But Rancher, the product, is an orchestration platform for deploying and managing Kubernetes clusters anywhere. It's a multi-cluster management solution that integrates with tools like Prometheus and Grafana and Bitnami's logging operator and Istio and all of these other things. Again, referring back to what I said, I'm going to repeat myself a lot because there is this common thread that runs through everything. In the case of Rancher, it's it's about getting you to your destination as fast as you possibly can. The journey is not the point. And it's really easy for us as technology aficionados, technophiles, to get stuck on the process, to get stuck on the building of the thing, because we like that. We like the creation of the solution. But ultimately, from a business's perspective, that's a cost center. The longer it takes to deploy a solution, the more money it costs, the longer you have to wait before your product can actually be available. So you want to shorten that time cycle. In most situations, when you shorten the time cycle, something has to go. There's a saying that says you can get cheap, fast, or good, but you only get 2 of the 3. So you can do cheap and fast, but not good, or good and fast, but not cheap. Rancher tries to solve that problem by Rancher, the product, by giving you a tool where you can shorten the timeline of deploying Kubernetes, importing Kubernetes, deploying workloads on Kubernetes, deploying day 2 operations solutions onto Kubernetes, and then making it so that those things happen in a repeatable way. When you deploy an RKE cluster from Rancher, you can set templates so that you can stamp out the identical cluster, and then it adds on backend identity provider configuration so that now you can plug it into your Active Directory installation, for example, and use those users and groups, so you no longer have to go and build IAM credentials or GKE, whatever Google's credentials are. You don't have to try and manage all of this secondary layer of cloud stuff. Rancher just does all of that for you. So that's for cloud solutions, and honestly, even on-prem. Like I run Rancher here in my house because it just does things faster, and it makes it, I told you earlier that I like to spend time learning new things. So the less time I have to spend building infrastructure is more time that I can spend learning cool new stuff.
And for the next question, that how RKE is different from others, and others are so many of them. So can you elaborate on what are the best fit cases for the deploying our infrastructure on RKE, or use cases or productions deployment strategies you want to look for in these kind of setups?
The big differentiator between RKE and other Kubernetes distributions is the fact that it's deployed entirely within Docker containers. So that makes it very easy to do upgrades, roll them back. You get all of the statefulness that containers provide. So you can do an upgrade of RKE and the old containers are still there. And if there's something that goes wrong, you can roll it back, and you have lots of options. It takes the power of containers and brings it to Kubernetes beyond like deploying containers into Kubernetes. As far as use cases, I mean, honestly, anywhere that you can put Docker is where you can put RKE. But that leads to the obvious next question that everybody has, which is, isn't Docker deprecated? Isn't the whole Kubernetes Docker thing? Isn't there like bad blood there, Romeo and Juliet, something like that? And yes, but no. We recognize, so when RKE came out, there was only Docker. That was it. And Docker is actually multiple products bundled into a single name. It's a container runtime interface. It's a networking solution. It's a build kit. It's an orchestration solution with Swarm. And there's a 5th thing that I never remember to go look up, but there's something else that it does as well. And when people say Docker, they often think of, oh, it's the command line. When people say Docker, they often think of just the CRI. The CRI is actually containerd, but they don't expose it in a way that Kubernetes can talk to it. So there's this shim, is what it's called, that allowed Kubernetes to talk to containerd inside of Docker. And Kubernetes finally got fed up and they're like, we're just not going to maintain this thing anymore. So that freaked everybody out. Mirantis stepped in and said, fine, we'll maintain it. So even if you are still running Docker, after Kubernetes 1.22, you'll still be able to use the Docker shim and everything will be fine. Nothing, no problems. But long ago, people recognized the need for an independent solution. The container runtime interface spec was created. And so things like containerd use the CRI spec, and Cryo, and there's others, so that you can run any container image inside of them and they speak the same language. We recognize that RKE, because it has a dependency on Docker, that it needs to evolve. Now, anybody who's using RKE, it's going to continue to run. We have when I say we, Rancher/Suse have customers who have support contracts related to RKE, and they're going to be taken care of, until the end of time. So it's never going anywhere. But I told you there was the third distro, RKE Government/RKE2, because I don't know what it is. I don't know why they named it RKE2. So K3S is a single binary that includes containerd and all of the Kubernetes stuff and kubectl and the flannel and like everything, all in a single binary. RKE2 is the same thing, containerd plus RKE plus a bunch of other stuff. And it was originally built for the United States government for FIPS 140 compliance to be deployed inside of government Kubernetes clusters. So they say that it doesn't currently have feature parity with RKE, and I don't know that that's exactly true because it's different. Like it's not RKE2 like version 2 of RKE, it's like RKE2, the other RKE. And so it's being built and more features are being added to it. And at some point it will become the successor to RKE, and you'll be able to deploy Kubernetes clusters with RKE2 directly from within Rancher and a bunch of other stuff that you would expect to be able to do with RKE. I don't know when that's scheduled to happen, but RKE2 it's bundled with containerd. So that solves the whole Docker question in its entirety, and that's where things are going.
Yeah, I also see the people talking about when they are using the VM, the first thing came up with the mind of the people, the compute. Then you talk about the networking side of VM, then eventually got introduced to the storage. And that's eventually happening in the container ecosystem as well. They talk about the computing part, people will have ton of solution the networking side, and now everyone is talking about the storage. So the topic that we see most ignore is the storage inside Docker, Kubernetes, and containers. But we see that the Rancher has their orchestrations, some kind of the Longhorn project. And also the question on storage side, how K3S using the storage and how RKE is using the storage, and some your initial thoughts on Project Longhorn, what it is, where it is going to be a fit in the cloud native storage part.
Yep. So when I was a field engineer for Rancher back in 2017, gosh, it sounds like it was so long ago. Back when I was a young pup in 2017, I used to tell people on sales calls that storage was like the holy grail of container orchestration. It was the thing that nobody had figured out how to do properly. The leader at the time was Portworx. And Portworx had a fantastic solution. They still have a fantastic solution. I don't remember who bought them, but somebody bought them. Good for them. Then Kubernetes started making cloud storage enabled, so you could provision an EBS volume from within your cluster. And then we moved into persistent volumes, persistent volume claims, and then storage classes. And at that point, storage was pretty well solved. If you had a workload, you could deploy storage attached to it. But what happens when you have, 1,000 pods? Like now you have 1,000 EBS volumes that you have to attach. And then remember, all we do is we trade our problems for other problems. Well, when we solved the storage problem, we ended up with a problem like what happens when a node at Amazon EC2 just freaks out and becomes unresponsive and you can't detach the volumes from it. They're just hung. So what happens if one of those volumes is your database? Well, Kubernetes might want to move the workload, but it can't reattach the volume. And you're stuck. It's like, what do you do? Amazon controls it. At least if it was in your own data center, you can go and power something off and it'll recover, but you don't have that option with Amazon. So even that wasn't good enough. And that led the super smart people at Rancher to be like, how can we solve this? And so they came up with Longhorn, which is a container attached storage solution. It abstracts storage. It abstracts the storage that Kubernetes sees away from the volume, the physical underlying volume. And it does that by putting it in a container. So the container can map to a volume, and now they created a whole layer of containers, each of which has a volume, and they can start doing things like block level replication between containers. So now you could have a 3-node cluster, and you can have So the way the Longhorn works is with locally attached storage. It wants to use a disk that's directly mounted on the node. And so the replica uses storage that's on the node. If for some reason, that replica and that node hangs, well, that's okay, because Longhorn recognizes that there are multiple replicas running on multiple nodes, and it promotes another replica to master and reattaches it to the workload, restarts the workload, and everything's fine. This solved the problem of nodes with stuck storage, the problem of replication, the problem of what do you do when you want NFS. Sort of the latest version of Longhorn, you can actually NFS mount, so you can do read write many on volumes via an internal NFS server. That's great. So it solved a whole bunch of issues by abstracting away the physical layer, the same way that Kubernetes abstracts other resources. It's just all about abstraction, and with that abstraction comes flexibility.
Also, is Longhorn gonna be supported outside the RKE or K3S or Rancher ecosystem, or is just built for?
Oh yeah. No, you can run Longhorn on any Kubernetes cluster whatsoever. Rancher tries to make its products independent of one another. So you can run RKE. In fact, Rancher has customers who use RKE that don't use Rancher, just because RKE is so stable and declarative. People use Rancher, they don't use RKE. People use Longhorn in any Kubernetes cluster. It's all independent.
Okay. So the next question that I think people always talk about, because for the container ecosystem, how do you want to configure CI/CD with Kubernetes? And we've seen a lot of articles are written on these kind of stuff. So what your suggestion or what you want us to adopt, especially in the Kubernetes-based system, it's in regard to CI/CD.
Wow, that's such a huge topic. There are a lot of things that you can do with so CI/CD, continuous integration and continuous deployment. Traditionally, if you look at people's CI/CD systems, they're only CI, they're continuous integration. Very few people have the bravery to actually do continuous deployment because it's fragile. You have to really build your system properly with good testing and make sure that if you're going to actually be doing continuous deployment, that it's going to work, especially when there's money on the line. There are a lot of ways that you can do CI/CD with Kubernetes, and I'm not in a position to say that one is necessarily better than the other. What I do agree with, and this is going to, I think, come in when we talk about GitOps in a little bit, what I do agree with is not making changes directly on a Kubernetes cluster. Because if something goes wrong, it's really easy to make changes. It's really easy to incrementally build out an application. But then if you need to do it all again, it's really hard, especially if you don't have the original cluster to refer to. So the more you can abstract, again, recurring themes here, the more you can abstract away the actual deployment of stuff into the cluster, the better. And the tools that exist to do that are CI/CD systems. At the most basic level, the cncn.io website is a static website built with Hugo, and it's hosted in a Git repository in GitLab. So I make a change, I push it up, I use GitLab CI, which does a build process inside of containers, and it builds a new image, and then it uses kubectl to actually, so it builds an image, pushes it out to a registry, and then uses kubectl to tell the cluster to pull down the new container image. That's pretty safe because it's a static website. If it built, it's probably okay. And so that's the most basic way to do it. It gets a lot more complicated when you got multiple microservices, and you can solve those problems with things like service mesh, with canary deployments, with weighted failovers, and a bunch of other complex things. But I would caution anybody to not over-engineer their solution until it's necessary. Implement the bare minimum of what you need to do today to get your stuff either built automatically, that's a great first step, and then possibly deployed. It may be automatically deployed to a staging system for somebody to actually test. That's a good second step. And then work your way up to doing live deployments. Don't start by thinking that you're going to deploy Istio and Canary deployments and a 12-factor app across 35 different container images all wired together, because you're going to hit a wall. And when that stuff falls apart, it's a lot harder to troubleshoot.
Yes. I think this question you're gonna very like about, and anybody listening to us, they see a new wave, and that new wave is called GitOps. And do we have
Yeah.
the ability to build GitOps enabled infrastructure in K3S or RKE or some other ranches projects? And we just build for this GitOps functionality, build around this GitOps functionality in the Suse or Rancho ecosystem.
Yes. So I'm still not super familiar with all of the projects that exist in SUSE right now. So I can talk about the things that I know about from Rancher. There's a lot of stuff going on inside of SUSE. So there may be another solution that fits this, or another project that fits this question, but I don't know about it. Within the Rancher side of things, there is a project called Rancher Fleet. And this you can also deploy into any Kubernetes cluster, Rancher, RKE, K3S, whatever, it doesn't matter. Any Kubernetes cluster, you could deploy Fleet. Fleet is designed for GitOps at massive scale. And GitOps, for anybody who's listening who's not familiar with GitOps, the idea of GitOps is an extension of what I was just talking about a moment ago, where you don't ever make changes to the Kubernetes cluster. You have a Git repository that is the source of truth. You update your manifests and you push them out to a Git repository, and there's a controller that runs on the cluster that pulls the Git repo and sees a change, pulls it down, reconciles it, and then actually does whatever you said it needed to do. The advantage of this is if your cluster blows up, as long as you have backups of the data, you can rebuild the entire cluster from the Git repository. And that's what you really want to be able to do. I just had a cluster meltdown that was only about 50% set up for GitOps. And I'm really grateful that I had 50% of it, because the other 50% I'm going to have to reconstruct from scratch, and it sucks. Sorry. Oh my gosh, Siri thought I was talking to her. So Rancher Fleet is a GitOps solution, and it works where there's, so at its bare minimum, you can actually deploy it into a Kubernetes cluster and use it for GitOps in that Kubernetes cluster. But what it's designed for is you have a control cluster, and then behind it, you have up to 1 million other clusters. And every time I say 1 million clusters, people, like, their minds pop, because who in their right mind would ever have 1 million Kubernetes clusters? And somebody at Rancher, again, I don't remember who, it might've been Darren, but it's easy to think of 1 million clusters, because 1 million clusters becomes, I mean, just look at the pervasiveness of Kubernetes everywhere. Look at smart cities, look at IoT devices, look at the ability to run K3S on a single node, and you've got a single node Kubernetes cluster with all of the orchestration and failover and health checking and all of that management built into it. Why would you not want this everywhere for any kind of workload that you want to be able to update? And I'm not talking, when we say IoT, I'm not talking about like firmware embedded on a IP camera that's sitting outside your house, but maybe. Have you ever tried to update the firmware on an IP camera? It sucks. Wouldn't it be great if you could just like put a new container image on it? That would be cool. So why not? Maybe it could run Kubernetes. Now you're at a place where, what if you are a police department and you have thousands of IP cameras that you need to update? Tens of thousands of IP cameras. Well, you need a solution that can do that. And that's what Rancher Fleet is designed for. Now, Rancher Fleet is bundled with Rancher 2.5, but it's also an independent project. So if you aren't running Rancher, you can just go and deploy it into your cluster.
Awesome. And for the next question is, what you think, what going to be a roadmap for K3S RKE is going to look like in 2021? What's your thoughts on that?
Roadmaps are not something that I have access to within Rancher. I'm on the evangelism side, where I like to talk about the things that I know they're actually about to come out with. I can only tell you that with every single release of K3S, RKE, Rancher, and all of the other stuff that's coming out of Suse's innovation department, Rancher is striving to do things faster, make things easier for the people who want to do stuff, and just empower everybody to be awesome. I mean, as cliche as that sounds, like that's really what it is. It's about giving people the tools to do great things. Beyond that, I can't tell you specific features because I don't know.
And also, I see some of the your courses in Rancher Academy as well. I have
Huh.
learned from that. I don't know, is our RKE operator course or some kind of that. Do we see other courses in Rancher Academy from your side in this year?
Yes. Wow. Your timing on that question is actually perfect. In, well, probably by the time this comes out, because within a couple of days of us recording this, there is a new Suse and Rancher community site that is launching. And this is a new home for the Suse and Rancher community that will include, it's almost like it's like a social network, but it will also include educational content. And I have spent the last couple of months moving the existing Rancher Academy content over. And I've also built a new course for K3S. And there are plans for additional educational content. Specifically related to Rancher Academy, the problem that we experienced is if you've taken it, the content is currently a year old. And while a lot of it is still very relevant, all of the RKE stuff, the Rancher portion is based on Rancher 2.3.5, and we're on Rancher 2.5, and in another few weeks, we'll have Rancher 2.6, and it's different. But because of the way that that content was structured, it was very difficult to update it. In the new community site, even though we've lifted and shifted the existing content over, there's a process in place now to actually run instructor-led courses to teach material and then bundle those up into an on-demand course afterward. So there'll be a 3-week K3S course, I think in May. I'm not 100% sure on the date, but there'll be a 3-week K3S course with an instructor. So go through that as well as office hour sessions. Then that'll be bundled up, and then anybody after that can just watch it and take the course on their own. And then when there's new material, we'll just update the material, run another 3-week instructor-led course, and then bundle that up into a new on-demand course. And hopefully with that system, we'll be able to get the content updated faster than we were able to with Rancher Academy. I know that's been a sore point for a lot of people, and for myself as well. But like I haven't had the 4 months that it would take to go and update Rancher Academy in its current state.
But I am the one who waiting for these courses from your side because if one of them I completed that and one new one came up, I definitely want to check that out and completed that. So next question
Cool.
is what do you think is going to be the Kubernetes production from your side? What do you think what's going to be happen in the Kubernetes ecosystem and the cloud native ecosystem moving forward?
I'm terrible at predictions, because I'm always impressed with people's ability to create solutions that I would have never thought of. There's a saying that says necessity is the mother of invention. Like when somebody needs something, they'll create a solution for it. And that is everywhere in what we're seeing. And it's goes back to the democratization of technology. Right now, anybody can learn Kubernetes. Anybody can learn a programming language. If you have a problem in your world, you can write a piece of software to solve it. And people are and do, and then they turn those into products and they turn those into businesses, or they just release them to the world out of love and other people get to benefit from them. I think that in 2021, gosh, everybody is so sick of being locked in their houses and lockdowns and pandemic and all this other stuff that I think there's all of this tension around community. I think we're going to see a release of people. So I don't know when we're going to be able to all go outside and hang out with one another again, but I believe that we are going to see that the tension around community transform into people helping one another, people wanting to see each other succeed, and people turning all of that pent up energy into new products and solutions that move things forward. I like to believe that humanity at its core is good and wants good things. So I hope that we do see things that do benefit people, and I hope we see the pandemic has really shown the disparity, the difference in different nations, in different groups within those nations, And I think that it kind of pulled the covers back and it made that stuff visible. And I hope that those who are in a position with technology to share it and make it available to others, that they do that as well. I know Suse has some programs going on with, actually, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say who with. There's a Suse program that will be announced soon that directly relates to this with making scholarships available for people to learn cloud native technologies. And I want to see more of that. I don't know if that's a prediction, but man, we can all use a big hug.
Definitely. And as we're wrapping up our all discussion, I think Adrian's the one person who don't is the best because you don't even be too bored when talking to him or listening to him. You always been a very active and talking when you're talking to him. So can you tell us what is coffee? Not just what is coffee, but is coffee and cloud native? And how you came up this term and really like this term, stay caffeinated. Can you give me another term that I can use for my shows?
No, I can't, because the way these things happen, it's like having a nickname. You don't get to choose your own nickname. Like you don't get to choose, I want to be Rebel or whatever. Somebody else has to give you a nickname. And it has to be somebody who knows you, and it has to come about naturally and organically from your own voice and your own style. Coffee and Cloud Native is something that I came up with largely because I knew it was going to be a morning show. I knew it was going to be about Kubernetes, but that's too specific. So Cloud Native was general enough that it allows me to talk about anything. And I drink a lot of coffee in the morning. So I knew I was going to have coffee too. And if you've watched the show, you see I'm like, bro, I'm super amped on caffeine, which carried over. I don't actually remember where Stay Caffeinative came from, which makes it a really good nickname, like slogan thing. I might have said stay caffeinated at one point, I don't know, and then somebody might have misheard it and thought it was caffeinative, but it stuck. And so that's where it came from. That's what it is. I don't know where it came from.
Yes, I try to figure out some probability around this native stuff and match these things. And can I came up with a new word that's going to be a very good one, but sound like a stay caffeinative is a very good word to use in the shows. But anybody, I think, who are listening to us, really enjoy the discussion with Adrian. And Adrian has his whole community. He's a Discord server. He runs his shows. You can see him all day talking about cloud native and Kubernetes stuff, and you're not even getting bored when watching him or listening to him. So I don't know how he
Hope not.
how he man- how, how he managed that, but it's been one of the dream of me to sit with him and talk about this stuff on cloud native and Kubernetes. And thank you very much. You showed up. I hope to catch up you again in future. And can I say, stay caffeinated?
Absolutely. Stay caffeinated, everyone. Thank you very much for having me, Sain.
Hey everybody, if you want to keep up what's going on in the cloud native ecosystem, we have a weekly podcast show on YouTube and SoundCloud by the name of Cloud Native Islamabad. You can listen for free every single week. We try to find cloud and cloud native experts, share updates on cloud native best practices, cloud native real world use cases, cloud native deployment patterns, cloud native deployment strategies. Topics include AKS on Azure, EKS on AWS, GKE on GCP, cloud native architectures, cloud native application developments, container containerizing application, DevOps and automation, cloud native certification strategies, cloud native career tips, and more. So if that sounds awesome to you, head over to the SoundCloud and YouTube and subscribe to Cloud Native Islamabad.